Dyer wave
3.
The arts reflect the soul, the spirit of a people. Architecture reflects the soul, the spirit of a people. And so therefore you can see the degeneracy, you can see the degradation, and the loss of aesthetics, the loss of the idea of there being harmony, order, symmetry in aesthetics is connected with the loss of a coherent worldview and philosophy. Dyer wave
3.
right.
How's it sound?
You sound great to me. Let's make sure that the audience can hear Blessed Father Deacon. Give us a little mic check there, Father D.
Check. 1, 2.
Perfect. So, one little piece of bad news.
Okay.
It will not let me do 2 window captures at once, so I'll have to ask our beloved Diva Tristana in a future date how she's able to do that, because I've been sitting here for a while trying to figure it out, and I can't figure it out. So I do have my white boy whiteboard present, so I can always sketch out something if we need to.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
So if you have one window up, which is where you are, it automatically the second window automatically defaults to whatever I add.
What if I did this? If I did a share screen?
You could try it.
Could you enable that for me? And then that way I can just go to the article. Let's see, share screen. Just for the participant, which is I. And then it'll obviously block out my ugly face, and then you can look at these logical truths, which is much more aesthetically appealing.
Can you guys hear Father Deacon?
Can you hear me?
Because it took me hours to figure all this out to get it to where now I can live stream on the new Mac with guests. If you guys remember, I was always having to use the old Mac, and that one was crappy, and so I needed to figure out how to get it going on the new. So hopefully we have done that.
What does that look like?
Whoa, that's not going to work on my end. But let me see if I can fix that.
What
okay.
does it look like?
Do that again where you had it. You're just sharing the YouTube. You're not.
I'm just sharing the YouTube. I want this.
Yeah, that works.
Okay.
But let me make me tiny. Let me make me small. There we go. This will work. Perfect.
Cool.
So the way to do this is for you to screen share. Got it.
See, that's logic. I just took a series of different problems, and I basically inferred to a solution that screen share, and
that was a fallacy.
A more like a Norm Macdonald kind of.
All right, so as you guys know, we're going to be covering this pretty excellent, pretty radical, pretty dudical essay that Father Deacon happened upon, and it's an excellent critique of the logical fallacies involved in what we could call natural theology, or what we could call the classical proofs, or which ultimately I think it rests on the notion of classical theism, that there's a generic theism, a generic God, generic principles that we know kind of prima facie, or know from an autonomous reasoning standpoint, that then kind of we can leap up, we can sort of play leapfrog up to there possibly being some kind of abstracted first principle, first cause, first actualizer, perfect unity, simple essence, etc. So, great boomer tech. Are you serious? Dude, I'm busted butt figuring out how to do all this stuff to precisely get away from being boomer tech. By the way, can you guys tell me if you hear Father Deacon well? Because
yeah, how am I? Do I sound nice?
I'm going to have to listen to you. They're going to lie. Yeah, because they're going to be like, oh, I can't hear anything. I can't hear anything.
How about that? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I know, but you're a little bit behind, so we'll have to verify it myself.
That's fine. We'll call
you
this
sound
the
perfect.
verification.
You sound perfect. I can't believe I got this right. Do you know how many hours it took?
Boomer Tech, you think a boomer could live stream? Are you serious? How many boomers do you guys know that live stream? Right? It's like how many boomers you know that are buying Bitcoin?
They say the same thing about me, and I'm not boomer tech. Like, just because I don't. So I'm a fallibilist when it comes to tech. I don't have the infallible chair of technology that keeps me from error. I'm sorry. That does not mean that I'm a boomer.
Pope John Paul the iMac. And we ask for the intercessions of our holy motherboard. Because we... Anyway, yes, so the essay is hefty. It's a good one, and I have been, of course, deeply involved. By the way, we got a couple announcements we're going to make as well. We want to announce your project that has finally come to fruition that, of course, I will be involved with, others will be involved with, which will be the website. Let's get to that in a moment, but this will relate to the book that Father Deacon and I both have been reading recently, which is very, very relevant to this talk today, which is the recently published Dr. Bradshaw anthology of a series of essays with other people like Richard Cross and Swinburne, discussing the status of natural theology. What does it mean? What is it? Is it actually even Orthodox? What is the Orthodox conception? So I'm enjoying that book. I'm almost done with it. But I did have a nice little excursion, side quest to finish Father Deacon's recommended paper. And I always read the papers. I got big old stacks of papers, and I work my way through them. And I've got all of my Thomistic summas all stacked here right beside us, ready to go in case we need to refer to
Jay,
that. But
was I right? Was I right? It was a good article.
Oh, yeah, it was actually better than I expected. I thought you were just doing your normal hyping things up, and then I would fall asleep. No, I'm just joking. No, I didn't think it would be as good as it actually was.
Revolutionary.
Well, what I've noticed is that it's a better, more formal presentation of a lot of the arguments that people in our Discord have heard me and you making for a long time. There's critiques that I've found and seen in Bonson, that I've seen in Van Til, but this is stated in a more formal way. So it's not just your kind of average rhetorical presentation. It's actually consistent, logical critiques. So we'll get to that in just a moment, but all of that just to say that I'll be having the debate on natural theology from the Roman Catholic perspective, whether we should or should not believe in it. Trent will be in the affirmative, I will be in the negative, and I think that's in, I don't know, 3 weeks, October 20 something, I don't remember, but that'll all be posted when we're ready to do it. But today will not be full for the audience. We can't show all of our we can't lay down all of our cards. Yeah, we can't lay down all of our mind control tricks.
And also, I have a discussion, and I'm not supposed to say with who. At the end of October, Orthodox Shahada, Lewis, and Kai's channel, they're going to host me with somebody really big who's going to be arguing natural theology. So it's all been kind of this.
Oh, I know you're talking about.
Kind of trajectory.
Yes.
Lewis did a wonderful interview.
Yes.
Where we got to actually talk about it.
Forgot about that. I watched that whole talk. Yes.
So it's nice that Jay, you, me, and we're all kind of working on the same project. We might be talking and debating different people, but it's all going the same direction, and it's really nice.
Yeah. So no, that's not actually true. To the person full of it in the chat, I have not literally clicked every work that I've finished reading on Goodreads. So no, I have not only read 46 books. So no, you did not have me beat by 2,200 books. That's not actually true. I quit using Goodreads years ago, and I didn't even finish or link all the books. We have thousands of books in this house, and I've not read all the thousands of books, no, but I have read more than 46 books. But anyway, so let's...
Do you want me to turn my volume up? They're saying that you're louder than me.
No, I have to do... Let me do that on my end. So I can make you a little louder and then make me a little softer. No, don't do that. Okay, so I've made you... How
about that? One is nice. Man, you guys are really picky. Oh, I gotta get my audio.
Well, I've spent multiple days getting this right. Jamie and I were spending literally about
nobody appreciates the hard work.
An hour to get the sound, but it's hard to get it right because I know, like, between what she and I do, or the last person, I don't know that your audio is going to be right because you're going to come in with that, you know, crazy dope screaming audio that you do, the beatboxing, the Tourette syndrome, all the stuff that you do when you come in here. So I have to readjust the audio. I'm just kidding. You don't have Tourette's. It's just a joke. Okay, I'm sorry. So let's get to you. Your show that you did with Lewis was great. I shared it, listened to it. It was a really good presentation of Orthodox epistemology. Got into the different levels and types of argumentation, and then you are going to, you have a new project. Let's talk about that right now. Let's get into the new project, promote it. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. So, you know, I've been thinking about this for a year. Just seeing all the various talent from many of the Orthodox content providers who had the blessing from their priests and bishops to do the work, and to see the fruits of that, and us loosely working together. We're seeing lots of converts and really great work out there. And I just started thinking about that, you know, well, especially, I think that something that unites us all is that we're not watered down orthodoxy. We're not Episcopalian boomerdocs, which we all know when you go that PC watered down Episcopalianism, try to appease and, you know, the crowd and find out what's culturally hip. I'm afraid to say this because people might get offended or get upset. Well, as we've seen in the United States, those institutions die because people are seeking a deep, meaningful, timeless truth. And I felt that all of us were bold enough, you know, when we're working to speak out. We're not too concerned about what's politically correct. And that this began to, what's the phrase I want to use? It reached those thirsty souls that wanted a deep, meaningful, bold orthodoxy. And I thought that if we could unite all of our works, because maybe somebody knows about your work, but they don't know David's, Patrick's, you know, Orthodox Shahada, and that's unfortunate. Sometimes there's some crossover, but I realized if we united all our kind of powers into one, consolidated,
we're like Voltron.
That's exactly what. And so I want to, you can see it's patristic. So what I came up with is, it's called patristicfaith.com. And I'm going to be hosting quality, top level Orthodox blogs. Abbot Triefin, many people in clergy are reaching out to me. We have already a clergy advisory board to make sure that this is, up to professional quality, as well as in line with the traditional teachings of the Orthodox Church. And we're not afraid to actually speak the truth. And, I have a quote for the page that, let's see if I can get this real quick. Pop this up for you.
We just hit 80,000 subscribers, and there's a guy in the chat saying that the channel is dying. So I guess we gotta quit.
Wow.
We gotta pack it up and quit.
Throat.
I'm done.
Let us not. I'm trying to remember that. Let me pop up the quote real quick. It's a quote from St. John Chrysostom. that we should not
about who we offend.
Worry about offending our fellow man, if by doing so we end up offending God. Here, let's see. Make sure I got this here. We must not mind insulting men if by respecting them we offend God. I thought it really kind of captured what we're doing. Hardcore orthodoxy, the last true rebellion, counterculture, speaking the profound, deep, timeless truths of orthodoxy without a care about PC, right? And so what I want is this site to not only consolidate all of this, and a lot of this was tied to Orthodox Montanica too. That was to get us all together, to kind of announce what's happening. And it really is a happening. It's a movement that, people are really excited. All these people are participating in it. You, the audience, the subscribers, all of you are giving, wonderful support for this. And we need this. We really do need this at this time when we're facing so many challenges and modernity and difficult things, to be able to equip the faithful with good podcasts, PDF banks, videos, articles from scholars and clergy and great content providers, commemorating the lives of saints, teaching the traditions of the fathers, and not ecumenism and not this kind of liberalism that's coming in and tainting. For crying out loud, people are actually supporting Origin. Get away from that. So that's the project. And we've got a clergy advisory board right now of 4 clergy. And
everything that we're doing has no clergy oversight, and we're just making everything up, and we don't even go to church, right?
Right. And I'm working with my archbishop, and we're working on this too, so that it gets the blessing from His Eminence. And I'm covering all my bases. So all you haters out there, you can't say it. This is quality control.
Well, the other thing too is that a lot of people, in today's climate, we don't know when at any point anybody could be deleted. So the more places that we have out there with good content, the better, because we are in the era of, big time deleting. So
and the other thing too is we have some really good experts coming on, professionals who basically are designing kind of web programs that will it'll make platforms irrelevant, so that you could destroy the platform, but you can't destroy the church. The gates of hell will not prevail.
You can hate the game, but don't hate the player, right?
Yeah.
So
that's it. We're really excited. It's
okay.
It's bigger than
You're really loud. Could you come down just a little bit? Just maybe 1 or 2 notches down. It's really loud on my end. So
how's that? Better?
Much better, thank you. It was getting some static there from the loud.
So that's it. Pay attention. You can find us on Twitter. We have a YouTube channel,
Patristic Faith. So yeah, and I'm gonna link the Patristic Faith stuff after the show. I forgot.
Yeah,
I did put your
Twitter, Facebook, YouTube.
I put your channel and all that in there, but of course people can find it from Father Deacon's channel, and we've all been linking it on our social media this week. But all right, so let's get to this issue of theistic fallacies, and let's explain how this relates to natural theology. How do you want to kick this off? I'll let you start it off.
Well, here's a man that really wants to get down to it, huh?
Well, if there's something else you want to talk about, I don't care.
I was just joking. I was thinking about that David Lynch Mulholland Drive with the cowboy.
Oh, that is the Cowboys line, right?
Here's a man that really wants to get down. You really do want to get down to it, do you? Okay. Let's just talk about, and I don't even know if this author, Dr. Gereby, if I'm pronouncing that right, Hungarian name, from Central European University in Budapest. He's obviously not Orthodox, I'm assuming. And so I'm not sure if he's actually realizing the implications of his paper. But for us, like you had said, Jay, these are all arguments and points that we had been making, but he had done this in such a succinct and formal way, being a professor of linguistics and philosophy professor, that I was amazed. And I mean, this is the nail in the coffin. This is the silver bullet. And he opens up, and this is great. 2 quotes, one from James. Thou believest there is one God, thou dost well. The devils also believe him and tremble.
Yeah, but it's enough, right? We can use the satanic, demonic apologetic, right? I mean.
And then the second one is Pascal, who's obviously one of my favorite philosophers.
I get my apologetics from demons. I don't know about you.
Somebody's going to clip that and spread. The other one is God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and scholars. And that really kind of sets the tone for what we're going to actually go into. So people might think, well, aren't we theists, Jay? Can't we identify as being theists? So maybe we should actually start with the idea of what is theism.
Well, yeah, he begins the paper by noting that, quote, theism, and by that he means specifically generic theism. And that's what he means by that is what we're always referring to as generic theism. And he calls it a philosophical program, right, to argue for the existence of some notion of a transcendent personal God, creator, governor of the world, etc. And so this is claimed to be the core, right? Core theism or generic theism, essential theism in the monotheistic religions, supposedly. That is, of course, the definition of the project that we get from people like Ed Feser, from Richard Swinburne, right? These are people who sort of hold up, whether they're Thomists in the Orthodox, so-called Orthodox people like Swinburne, or Thomists like Ed Feser. You know, Feser in his book, he defines classical theism as the God of Plotinus, the God of Aristotle, the God of Averroes, Avicenna, and Augustine, as if those are the same God.
So if the rational core doctrine is true, that by the word God, we have this kind of monotheistic and kind of some necessary properties that we all mean, kind of a lowest common denominator. That's what's called the rational core doctrine, and we'll go into exactly what properties or attribute that would include within their idea of rational core. If the rational core doctrine of the theist is true, then several different things follow. The classical theistic arguments for the existence of God can or do work. So that would be the cosmological arguments, the 5 ways, teleological arguments, design arguments, ontological arguments. The classical theistic arguments would work. Why? Because, as Jay said, well, it's a generic God. It's not the God of Abraham, Isaac, but the God and Jacob, but the God of the philosophers and scholars. Also, the other implication would be, if the rational core doctrine is true, then at least of all 3, the monotheistic religions, then we worship the same God. So maybe we're not getting everything correct, but ultimately when we're praying, we're worshiping the same entity. It's just, and don't you hear this exactly with what the Pope's saying too? And Jay, you've talked about that too. So now the Pope's saying Roman Catholics can't attempt to convert people because, look, Muslims, Jews, and Christians, we all worship the same God. So we have, and he states this, if that's true, if the rational core doctrine is true, then the theistic arguments, classical theistic arguments work for God, to prove God's existence, and then we all worship the same God. What he presents is his case. He states it at the beginning through a modus tollens, which you've heard me use the modus tollens, right? The modus tollens is if P, then Q, not P, therefore not Q. So he sets up at the beginning of the paper, this is what he's going to argue. So let's plug in for P and Q. If there is a rational core doctrine, then the theistic arguments for the existence of God can work. Next premise, there is no rational core doctrine, or the rational core doctrine is false. Therefore, theistic arguments for the existence of God do not work. That is pretty powerful. I mean, we can, in one argument, theoretically destroy every classical theistic argument right there in that modus tollens. That's profound. And we haven't even got into it yet. And then it would not follow, therefore, it would not be true that all the monotheistic religions worship the same God. And we'll see that as we start to go through. You want to add anything to that?
Yes. So basically, at the outset, the problem is that the natural theological argumentation assumes that generic theism is the case. This is, however, an unproven assumption and presupposition. So it's a failed project from the outset. There is no simple monotheism that operates as some a priori or self-evident or some theory-neutral brute factuality by which we can attain this core doctrine.
That's right. And he calls that core doctrine the central claim of theism. That's what theism is. So what he's going to do in order to make the modus tollens a sound argument that works and destroys theism, he's going to have to show what? Premise 2, that the rational core doctrine is false, or the central claim of theism is false. And he says he's going to do that in 2 ways. He's going to look at what's called the theistic fallacy. And that is, the theistic fallacy is the consequence of what he calls, and we'll go further into this, substitutability of identicals in belief contexts. And then also the theistic paradox. And he's going to show that the failure of theism is in the neglect of the special semantic and logical behavior of its central terms and claims, like belief sentences within the term God. Now, I know it's a lot of kind of stuff to take in, but I'm just kind of setting out from the outset. He's going to destroy the rational core doctrine. How is he going to do it? He identifies that with the central claim of theism. And he's going to do that through the theistic fallacy and the paradox of theism to show that it can't be done. So now we've got a kind of purview of where we're going to go with this. And then we'll see the implications too, further implications. Now, did you like, Jay, that he had that quote from Aquinas? Now, as Aquinas said, one is well advised to avoid bad arguments in theology, since in a fallacious supporting argument is no support at all. What's more, it discredits the solid foundations too. And I've been making this point over and over in class, and I made it in Lewis's. It's not about getting to a true belief and concluding God exists, or the triune God exists even. You want to believe something, you want to infer for the right reasons. And as I brought up in the stream with Lewis, one of the problems is we all have different reasons. We all have different starting points, and they all can't be true, correct? So that's one thing that I think natural theology ignore. This is like, well, as long as we just kind of get there, right? And I feel like the middle stuff's like going well. You know, the argument in the middle isn't bad, but nobody thinks about this kind of the presuppositions and starting points. If your starting point is bad, your whole argument's bad. You have no good reasons to get to the actual true conclusion. But everybody's starting points are different. Is it the peripatetic starting point? Is it a priorism? Is it, you know what I mean? There's all this stuff that, and so this will be, that's what he's kind of talking about too with the Aquinas quote. Avoid bad arguments in theology. Why? Because a fallacious supporting argument is no support at all. Good point, Aquinas. Sometimes Aquinas does get things right. There is one. We're also going to see religions cannot share a common nature due to the special behavior of the term God. That's kind of what I already said. But let's go in, and I can share the screen if you want, where he's actually going to talk about and define what he means by theism. And guess what? He quotes Richard Schwimmer, who is a huge supporter of natural theology in the very Western sense. Correct, Jay?
Yep, I'm just trying to make sure the audio is correct. Everyone's bitching about it, so.
Are you kidding me?
No, it's always an issue. So
I mean,
I've got it as best I can.
Part, but it's not.
I mean, it should be good enough. You sound fine to me. I mean, I play it on my phone. I can hear you clear as day. So I don't know what the problem is.
I'm gonna do something real quick. I'm gonna look at.
No, it's not on your end. Please don't change your end.
No. I'm going to listen like you're doing on the YouTube and see if we have a bunch of liars in the chat. Lying.
I mean, people come and talk about the stupidest garbage in the chat. So, all right, yeah. So a couple points I wanted to make was that, so.
Perfect.
Can you not do that, Father Deacon, please? Because it's just echoing.
I just wanted to check and make sure.
Don't worry. I'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. So.
You got it? Okay, let's go.
So if he says that, so I just finished the Rada Galwitz book on Saint Basil arguing the Cappadocians, arguing with Eunomius, and one of the things that comes up in that book is how insistent that Basil was on the fact that when we name God, we're really naming the triune God. There's no other route to knowing and naming and having conceptual content that refers to the Christian God other than going to the Trinity, right? So when we predicate of God, we're speaking of the person of the Father and by extension the Son and the Spirit. And that's why you see the Cappadocians so often saying, I can't conceive of the one without quickly being moved to the three. I can't conceive of the three without quickly being moved over to the one. So does that make sense?
Yep.
So if that's the case, then as I was reading this paper, I was just thinking about how absurd it would be to read all of that, to read the works of St. Basil, and then come to the conclusion or think that, oh, actually Basil and Eunomius are arguing for the same God. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we've always...
No, there's thousands of pages spilled by the Cappadocians to point out that the theism of Eunomius, which is a generic Unitarianism, is not Orthodox. There's no common ground there in the sense of systems, right?
Exactly. And we've been making that argument for a while now. So I'm glad to see that, again, God is Trinity, as I said, that is who God is. So you can't, as he'll point out in this article, that cannot be substituted with a generic theism.
Yeah. We see, for example, that Aristotle is called a heretic by St. Basil in Hexameron 2. And it's not just that, well, okay, but he got some things right and some things wrong. That's true in one sense, but when it comes to the salvific knowledge of God, when it comes to what we're actually after here, right? It doesn't work to try to make arguments that are premised on a faulty epistemology. If we don't believe that there is actually, in fact, neutral ground, that there is generic theism, then both of those things are not going to work, right? They're both going to, they stand or fall together. And so if generic theism is premised on there being neutrality, which is the case, right, then I don't know. This is starting to piss me off here, the audio.
It sounds good. Don't listen to them.
So anyway, so let's get to Richard Swinburne, because he kicks off
that screen. Yeah,
he kicks off with his definition of the project of generic theism, or what's he call it? Theism. He doesn't call it generic theism. He calls it what? Theism corollary.
Let's see. Do you see the
page 4?
Yeah, page 4 here.
Yeah,
we call this 1S for one Swinburne.
Right.
You'll notice the H will be for Hick, right? And as we go down, I'm going to look up. That is from Coherence of Theism, Swinburne's book. He states, by a theist, I understand a man who believes that there is a God. By a God, he understands something like a person without a body, i.e. a spirit, who is eternal, free, able to do anything, knows everything, is perfectly good, who is the proper object of human worship and obedience to the creator and sustainer of the universe. And as we see, we will go down to he'll break these down into actually a whole list of premises, right? I think he calls them D and C, right? Like there's like 7 and then 8, 9. So that's a good definition right there of what theism would be. And supposedly that should be, as he sees here in the second paragraph, well, that should be common understanding once you add kind of the monotheism, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That should all fit, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So Christians, Jews, and Muslims are all, in the sense, theists, according to Swinburne. So that's 2S. Third premise. And this is the essential doctrine. Many theists also hold further beliefs about God. And these Christians, Jews, and Muslims differ among themselves. Yet, further beliefs in which some members of each group differ among others. Sorry, that's not the core doctrine. That'll become important, though. He perceives this difference is in terms of core as far as addition. So what that means is the assumption here is there's a lowest common denominator, a core. How do I account for differences? It wouldn't be a difference in the core, but additions to the core. Correct?
Right.
And then Jay, you can talk about this because I thought you had some good points. Here you have John Hicks, the famous perennialist and professor of religion. And what he states, he puts, the author of this article puts into a premise called 4H for Hicks. Premise 4 from H. Hicks. So in other words, between ourselves and God, as God is, and God's ultimate transcendent being, there's a screen of varied and changing human images, not graven images, but mental images or pictures or concepts of God. He calls this the veil. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because that's going to be important.
Right. So this would relate to the whole project of natural theology. And as Dr. Bradshaw says, there's a clear connection between the project of natural theology and absolute divine simplicity. And of course, if what we're knowing about God is all creaturely signifiers, it's all reasoning about creaturely causation or or this creature's relation to that creature, then we're never actually getting to the thing itself. We're only sort of using creaturely analogies, right? And we find this, for example, in Thomism, that literally even in the life of grace, according to the Thomist, you're actually only still operating and interacting with created realities. You're never actually in this life touching on the thing itself, because that would be reserved for the beatific vision. And there's no beatific vision in this life. Hence why there's no uncreated grace doctrine there. There's no uncreated energies. This is again the debate between St. Gregory Palamas and the Barlaamite. And so this is again why the anthropology directly relates to the theology. If you don't have the doctrine of the nous, if you don't have the doctrine of the uncreated energies, then you don't have a clear way to name God. And that's precisely why Basil says in letter 234 against Eunomius that what we name is the energies. Those are the actions, attributes, powers of God that come down to us, St. Basil says. And so the analogia, the naming, is the naming of those energies and not the divine essence. This is the basic, point of the essence.
And Jay, that's a great point too. It's the point that we always make, that there's an immediacy with God. There literally is divine energies, and which we're naming, as you pointed, are the breaking in. That we don't have to be mediated to the transcendent monadic God through a causal chain, a created causal chain that I can only access.
Can you please back up a little bit? It's really, it's like overpowering, and it sounds like static on my end.
How about,
so it was fine the way it was. Just ignore the trolls in the chat. They're just trying to trip us up. It's probably a bunch of Roman Catholics who are mad that we're doing this. But
okay, I'll ignore. Let me start over. So this proves the point that, again, there's the energies give us an immediacy with God, so that we don't have to be mediated through ideas or through a created causal chain that's only accessible to our ideas. And only if that's true, if I can actually build a philosophy about causation that's actually true from an autonomous point of view, I actually can't. So what I thought was interesting about Hick's argument was his veil argument illustrates the flaws of natural theology. Because what does he say? We're all just behind this veil, and we're constructing these different images and phantasms.
Yeah, this is why Thomism and the Natural Theology Project leads to the same positions of perennialism. What Hicks says is precisely what sounds like what Vatican II says, right? That all the religions are just kind of aiming at the same generic thing, right? This is why Vatican II says Hindus worship in love the same God as we do. Islam is worshiping the same God as the Christian. We're all worshiping the same God, even the Hindus. So for Vatican II, it's not even monotheism that's the so-called lowest common denominator core requirement. But again, I like the fact, before we moved on to that, he notes that the core doctrine, this idea of a core theism or generic theism, it actually presupposes the very thing that's in dispute, right? The very thing that's in dispute is that we're naming and correctly identifying this God, but this God is not the same amongst these monotheistic faiths. And so, for example, when it mentions things like the personal God, if you know the history of the dispute, as I said, between the Cappadocians and Eunomius, then you know how crucial the doctrine of the personhood of God is, and how much dispute there is, and how much ink is spilled over what it is to be hypostasis or person. And in fact, the Thomists do not get this right. They're actually more in line with Eunomius. So the idea of Swinburne, who is going to come to the table with a generic theism, doesn't even realize that he's actually presenting things more like Eunomius than what the Cappadocians said. So imagine, just think of the absurdity of this. Oh, let's do our apologetic in union with Arians and Eunomians. But then when we get to theology, they're heretics without grace. I mean, it's just absurd. It's
That's
so
a wonderful
stupid.
argument. Where did you get that? Well, funny thing, I actually ran into this heretic the other day, and he actually said, but he's a heretic. So there's a kind of inconsistency there, you're saying.
But it's not just an inconsistency of like, oh, you're, haggling over some theological minutia with eunomius. No, it's not minutia. It's the very Trinitarian doctrine itself. And so how could there be a common apologetic between, how could Basil and eunomius be on the same side together against, I don't know, Richard Dawkins? It doesn't make any sense, because eunomius is not going to have the right doctrine or the right, he's fundamentally flawed such that he's excommunicated and called a heretic. So how is he going to be arguing for the same God? It's not. And
I think they all originate from Origen, Eunomius. What do they all do? I would say they all start with this kind of autonomous epistemology, this embracing of kind of Greek metaphysics and the ability that, from these literally made up principles and stories that I'm making, I can actually do all this stuff. Is it any surprise that they actually get to heretical conclusions?
When you say made up story, what do you mean?
I'm actually saying that when somebody says the first principles of that, you can go through a series of cause and effects, or the peripatetic axiom, right? To me, when I read these kind of first principles, ontological principles, metaphysical principles, they're not revealed to the philosophers. They're made up. They're stories. Well, let me just, like we always say, just grant me my whole story, Jay, and then I can actually prove my case. They can't function as epistemic starting points, right? Because they're viciously circular and arbitrary. And I think this is ultimately the problem, because even notice in what Hicks is the veil argument, and even with the author, the rational core, it's pretended autonomy, that I could start with my mind and then I could ground all this stuff as legitimate accounts of knowing, apart and a denial of revelation. That's why he starts the article, the God of Jacob and Isaac and Abraham is not the God of the philosophers. And so it's that fundamental, it may seem like a small issue at the beginning, but every heretic embraces this Greek metaphysics and this type of philosophical
It's
project.
the autonomous project. It's the project of autonomous reasoning, that I can build a system from my head. I don't need revelation. I don't need God. I just need my mind functioning as it is, autonomously, like a tabula rasa, to construct a system.
And that's why Hick is actually consistent and the rest of them aren't. If that were true, you're literally behind the veil and you're creating, as he says, images that maybe they attach to, right? That you're hoping, but everybody's different. So either, what's the conclusion? They're all wrong or they're all right. Hick text, that's all right. But guess what it denies?
Yep. That
the transcendent God breaks in and reveals himself. The God is the Lord and he has revealed himself.
This is what I've said so many times. Fazer, in his chapter on Neoplatonism, says we can appropriate the Neoplatonic arguments because there's a great presentation, he says, of the one being eternal, timeless, and unable to, he couldn't be in time because he would be subject to change. Oh, so you're arguing for a thing that excludes the incarnation. Good job. It's a great apologetic.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Can I give you another point too? That
yes, please.
So something I've mentioned many, many times, which is that, which he actually brings up, right? So he actually says, wait a minute, on what basis is it known that there are primary categories or attributes or properties of God that we kind of know right away from our reasoning process, as opposed to the secondary categories, which are somehow in a lesser known, unclear status? This is arbitrary. And this is something I keep pointing out. On what basis is it that when we supposedly are doing our autonomous reasoning, we're able to come to the conclusion that God is a perfect unity, he is a perfect simplicity, he is a perfect, I'm just using some of the examples, a quote, first cause, he is a pure act, and that he acts, and therefore the omnis, and that he is, quote, personal. Wait a minute. So these are in Swinburne's list, right? I don't think he uses act, but he says attributes. So I can use pure act. It's another one of the things that's supposedly right in the Natural Theology Project. But on what basis then is Father Logos, triad, right? These other names, on what basis are these in the second category? It's arbitrary. In other words, the thing that then the Natural Theology Project person, the generic theism person, it's evident that these are known by reason alone, and these are part of faith. Really? So you can approach God apart from Father? Really? But how is he personal if it's not Father? Do you see that these are not prima facie self-evident or first category names of God that you know through human autonomy, and these are secondary? That's arbitrary. And by the way, there is no theism that says that you know God. There's no Orthodox Christian theology that says that you know God apart from Father first and foremost. Mm-hmm. So do you see why that doesn't work? Father Deacon, do you get my argument, my point here?
I thought you were talking to the crowd. I was waiting for the crowd to respond. Do you guys see? Yes, exactly. And that's just a perfect summary of pretended autonomy. And how ridiculous it is.
So if there's not a on what basis then is triad or God the Father a secondary category of things that we know or name about God that are not part of the core? In other words, Swinburne's list is arbitrary, mm-hmm. And by the way, it's not consistent either, because
and he says that too.
Yeah.
It's circular. It's remember. I mean, how many times have we come across this? Well, just grant me it so I can make without justifying it, so I can actually prove my case.
Now, wait a minute. If these are arguments for the existence of God, we're not going to grant you all these things. Just grant me my argument for God's existence, and I'll prove to you God's existence, right?
So why don't people usually call this out? Because they might agree with it, or it sounds good. I'm starting to notice that people don't put the question mark down looking for justifications far enough. Well, yeah, that kind of sounds good. I believe that about God too. So, and then they just stop there, which is to actually say that I'm granting you your arbitrary premise so that you can make your argument. I don't need you to justify anything anymore. Just
yeah, let's move over to page 5, if we would.
Okay, let me just share real quick and just where we're at, because it'll get us right into 5. I wrote some notes on this, and this will be helpful. What have we seen so far? To recap, premise 1 defines a theist. Okay, this is using Swinburne. Okay, eternal, free, able to do anything, knows everything, is perfectly good. Person without a body, i.e. a spirit, proper object of human worship, obedience, creator, and sustaining universe. Premise 2, Swinburne, Christians, Jews, and Muslims are all in the above sense theists. So he's connecting these. Premise 3, many theists also hold further beliefs about God, and these Christians, Jews, and Muslims differ among themselves, and yet beliefs in which some members of each group differ from among others. Remember, that's the additional clause. The core remains the same. Their differences just can be explained by adding things to the core. Then premise 4 from Hick. So in other words, between ourselves and God, as God is in his ultimate transcendent being, there is a screen of varied and changing human images. That's not going to account for the differences, not graven image, but mental images, pictures, or concepts of God. Okay, here's the important part, and this is going to get us to page 5. The central core claim of theism. Theistic belief. That God exists and that there's one God. We would all believe that. The theistic core premise 2, the monotheistic religions all believe in the same God. What he wants to see, does it follow from 5cc1, 6tc2? And that's what we're going to actually get into. He's going to say no. Simply from that fact and the above premises, you cannot make an inference, a valid inference to 6tc2. Sound good?
Yeah.
So page 5. Let's go. Okay. I'm on page. There, I just explained page 5. Was there anything you wanted to add to that? Because then we're going to go to 6.
Yes, because on page 5, I did want to read this quote about the veil that we mentioned earlier.
Yes, please
and
do. That was a great
notice
quote.
the similarity between the Natural Theology Project, the Generic Theism Project, the autonomous reasoning assumptions, and Freemasonry. He says, a first significant corollary of the theist view can now be noted. This corollary would have that no religion can lay more claim to truth than the others on issues that go beyond the so-called core doctrines. Now, this is a perennialist, right? This is Hicks. Mm-hmm. This must be especially so for Hicks, since every religion is on the same inner side of the veil, and the veil is what prevents us from getting to predicating and picking out the particular proper God that we're after here, right? The peculiarities are all appendages to what is rationally approachable. So the Trinity, right? Specifics, the 99 names of Allah, those are peculiarities or appendages or the accidental aspects of religion that specifies Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, as opposed to the so-called core doctrines, which are, again, totally arbitrary and circular. They are assuming the very thing that they're there to prove, right? Which is what we just saw. How do we know that God is a unity, a simplicity, a cause, a pure act, the omnis, and personal, but we don't know about Father, Logos, Triad, etc. Right? That's a problem. And so the other position, the opposite position, this position of the natural theologian, the perennialist, the so-called generic monotheist, he goes on to say, the peculiarities of these religions are the appendages to what is actually rationally approachable. But the peculiarities are for decorative purposes. As all of these three religions result from the additions to the one core that is established by reason, the autonomous reasoning project, they can also be equally false. And for the same reason, they can thus be equally true. Mm-hmm. So if Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have a core religion, then it's not actually Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It's the core religion that is the real thing, and these three are actually false because they have the appendages that are not the essence of the thing.
None can be completely true, he says. So isn't that amazing?
And then it can also be equally false.
Yeah. Just like what we do with David Hume or Peter Singer, it takes somebody like Hicks to show that Hicks actually being consistent. We can actually use Hicks the way that we use David Hume, or even Peter Singer, even though we don't agree with Hicks' position, to show he actually consistently arrives to a correct conclusion. Either they're all equally false, or they're all equally true.
Yeah, if you believe in generic theism, that should be your conclusion, and pick whichever one you want, because they don't matter because they're stupid. The religions are dependent on the contingent historical circumstances, and they evolve accordingly, according to Hicks in this perennialist view. And thus, it is only the reasonable core, which is the lasting and necessary thing that we're arguing for and reasoning to, right? And how Masonic does that sound? Does that not sound like Freemasonry? Well, of course it does, because it sounds just like the perennialism, right? But because they have a false assumption that you can reason to God's unity, God's simplicity, God is first cause, God is pure act, God is the omnis, God is personal, apart from Trinity, apart from Jesus. Mm-hmm. No, you can't. Again, go read Basil versus Eunomius. Generic theism is thus predicated on autonomous, neutral reasoning, that there's neutrality, that there are generic, self-evident, or more evident attributes of God that we come to apart from revelation. Somebody, go ahead. All right, so I just wanted to add those points. So now we're ready for page 6 here. Here we're going to get Swinburne's arbitrary list that I've been talking about.
Okay, so on this, just to make it more visibly pleasant, I'll just share my notes on the... So we're going to call it there's the central core theistic belief and then the corollary, and it's not going to follow. Okay, so everything that we've said so far can be summarized in these main points, and this would be Swinburne's position, and by default, any natural theologian or
exactly.
theist.
And this, by the way, remember, this applies to the natural theology of all three monotheistic so-called religions. So these refuters refute the natural theologians in Islam, the natural theologians in Rome, and the natural theologians in the Protestant realm.
Yes. There is a God who is, that's 7a, 7b, omniscient, omnipotent, eternal, free, good, creator and sustainer of the universe, a person. The theist God is worthy of worship and obedience. The theist God is the same for all monotheistic religions. And he's specifically going to show these two, 7D and 7E, are incompatible. But all of those are necessary in order to have this, which is the central core of the theistic belief. Remember, you're plugging in that God exists, that there is a God. Well, what is God? 7a down to 7e. Yeah. So if you can show that those two are incompatible, mutually exclusive, then you can't actually make the jump from 5cc1 to 6tc2, which is exactly what we want to show, that the monotheistic religions do not believe in the same God.
Yeah. Well, I want you to keep going. I'm going to actually grab a couple books while you're talking because they illustrate these points. So go ahead.
Okay. So notice, here's some notes that 7a through 7d constitute the claim of 5cc1. What's the claim 5cc1? The central core theistic, that God exists and there's a God. So all of this constitutes 5cc1, which is basically what I already said. And we're actually going to see that because the term God is not rigid, and I'm going to tell you about what that means. God is not, and he lowercases God because God capitalized gives the appearance of what's called a proper name, which in philosophy of language and logic would be known as a rigid designator, that it denotes one entity and only one entity across all possible worlds, such that that entity could be substituted into any claim. Now, substitutability of identicals is necessary for the theist. Why? Because he's going to make this claim here. If God means 7a through 7d, okay, then if common core is true, then I should be able to substitute the same God for Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, right? Okay. But that's only if it's a rigid designator, that's a proper name. And he's going to argue that the term God is not a rigid designator, since it can mean different things in different possible worlds. Just as Jay said, God means something different for Aristotle, Averroes, Aquinas, Avicenna, etc. And he's going to develop arguments that there is no such identifiable individual that would qualify as a single referent of the term. Or there are as many as they're describing a certain entity. The term God is therefore what we call in logic and philosophy of language a flaccid designator, even for monotheists, which could pick up different values in different religious frameworks. And what he's going to argue, the author of this article, is that it only becomes a rigid designator, and I'll explain a little bit more what that actually means. in light, so a rigid designator is picking out an identifiable entity and only that entity, such as there's only one. Because notice the monotheists aren't going to say, oh, well, there's multiple gods. No, there's one God. Okay, so what is it about our names and properties or thoughts that actually hit what we'd call in philosophy intentionality, hit the object of intention, your sense and then your reference, and you're referring and hit it. Okay, so let's see, what else should we say about that? Proper names like Father Deacon Dr. Anna, Jay Dyer. There's only one of those, right? I mean, even if somebody took on another name, the notion of a proper name is that it's identifying. And Saul Kripke goes in Naming and Necessity, his work, he goes into this. Let me give you examples of rigid designators. So they're identity statements. And identity statements are going to be important to this argument because what the thesis it needs to do is to make a substitution in order to validate the claim that all monotheistic religions believe in the same God, regardless if there's additions, right? It's the same thing, it's just there's other stuff on that. Well, if that's true, if there really is a core theistic belief, a central doctrine, then you can substitute that across the board. It's just you're getting what do they call appendages, right? Or what was the other phrase that he used?
Accidental qualities.
They're just accidental qualities. And maybe you got that wrong. Maybe you described something about Jay Dyer that it isn't actually true, that he has red hair or something like that. But we're still hitting the same entity. That would be true if and only if Jay Dyer is a rigid designator. And it's a rigid designator because it's a proper name. So whether you know that or not. So the typical example is Samuel Clemens and Mark Twain. You might give a different list about Samuel Clemens. Like Samuel Clemens is like this and Mark Twain's like this. But because those are proper names, the sense refers to one and the same referent, such that you can say Samuel Clemens is Mark Twain. The other example is the morning star and the evening star, Hesperus and Phosphorus. Those are not flaccid designators. They're not properties. And you say, well, what is Hesperus? And you start to describe the morning attributes. It's in the morning, it's located this. Then phosphorus, that it's the evening, it's located in a different. So you have different senses, but Hesperus is phosphorus because they're proper names. Whereas, so what does that mean? Once you discover that, that's what Saul Kripke calls a posteriori necessity. You may not know that, but Hesperus and Phosphorus is Venus in every possible world because it's a rigid designator, as opposed to, I don't know, give me, George Bush is what president is he? What number? George W. Bush.
666th president. I don't know.
Let's see. Let me just type it in real quick. Is this George W. Did Gorbachev tear down those rigid flaccid designators? Okay. George Bush is the 41st president of the United States. Okay. The 41st president, that sense, that description, 41st president of the United States, is a flaccid designator. it happens to refer to George W. Bush, but not of logical necessity. Could have been something else. So notice, rigid designators apply to an entity in every possible world. There could have been a possible world in which somebody else got the presidency, and therefore the description of 41st president. So it's a flaccid designator. It's a non-rigid designator. George W. Bush is George W. Bush in every possible world. Samuel Clemens is Mark Twain in every possible world. Hesperus is Phosphorus in every possible world. That's because they're proper names. Okay, now it's a lot of fluff, but what am I trying to say? Well, this is important because is the term God a flaccid designator, a non-rigid designator, or is it a rigid designator? If it's a rigid designator,
it is flaccid. It is non-rigid.
Yes, if it's a rigid designator, then the theist is actually true, and we can substitute, and we're all worshiping the same God.
Right,
but we're going to go through some arguments.
Scripture itself tells us it uses the word in many ways, so we know it's not rigid.
Right. And we're going to go through some detailed arguments. Hopefully I didn't lose people on the kind of heavy-duty philosophy, but it's actually important. If not, you can pay for Jay's other second half, where we'll explain the mysteries. Okay. Here is something interesting too. Let me share this. And he says it's not clear whether that list 7b 1 through 6 and 7c is to be understood as a long conjunct. Now, what a conjunct in philosophy is like this: A and B and C. Now, that has a particular truth value that's going to be different than this: A and C and that's basically what he's saying there, is that, well, how are we even supposed to take this list? Because, for example, right, do we take it like this, in which there's one truth value, or I change that and the truth value is going to change? So is it all together and then an addition of something, or all together? That's what he was saying. And that's actually going to become an important thing. Okay. But here's the theistic paradox clearly stated. 7D, so he's going to say it doesn't matter. Just kind of an interesting thought. How are we going to take that? Maybe that's something we could come to later. But the fact of the matter is, here's the grave error. 7D and 7E are mutually exclusive. 7D states the theistic God is worthy of worship and obedience.
Yep.
7E, the theistic God is the same for all monotheistic religions. And he says, if it is the case that a monotheistic God demands obedience, which is only meaningful if the demands are explicitly specified by laying down certain requirements,
yes,
rules, or laws. This is the paradigm relative.
And the demands are particular to each religion, and Islam's demands are not Christianity's demands. Islam's demands are mutually exclusive to Christianity. Christianity's demands are exclusive. There's no commonality in terms of whether you can do the same things. For Islam, the Trinity is shirk. For Christianity, Islam is totally heterodox, Arian. So
and that's what he says. Obedience to one law excludes commitment to the other.
Yeah. What do the Ten Commandments say? Can you have other gods? No.
Yeah. So consequently, 7D cannot hold. Or conversely, if the theist God is the same for all monotheistic religions, then it can't demand a special allegiance, right?
Yeah.
Since allegiance implies special requirements. Therefore, 7E cannot be maintained. They are mutually incompatible, but that is necessary for the theist to actually make that argument.
Yeah. So if we're going to be natural theologians, don't try to make me a Christian.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
that is the first kind of knockdown argument that he has. Wouldn't you say, Jay?
Absolutely.
And he's gonna give one after another. So what we've done so far is just set up what is the theist argument.
Can I give some examples to hammer this home, that this is not just some abstract paper, right? If we were to go to the top thomist out there, the pop thomist, the guy who makes it, right? If we go to Ed Fazer's book, 5 Proofs for God, he says, for example, early on, that the arguments for God's existence in his book, or in Thomism, Roman Catholicism, they're all grounded on self-evident principles, foundationalism. And when asked about, well, how do you know the self-evident principles are actually true? I'm not joking, his argument is that he says they are, quote, completely general. Well, we all know that they are. That's literally his argument. And then he goes on to say, and therefore I'm going to argue for a generic one, that is completely changed, that is totally changeless and immutable and cannot be in time and space. If he were in time and space, this would entail him undergoing change. That's Fazer on page 75. Okay, so this God that you're arguing for cannot incarnate. If he were in time and space, according to you, he would change, and therefore the one that you're arguing for is completely non-incarnational. He cannot incarnate by definition. So Fazer wants me to accept all of this argumentation that's autonomous and inconsistent, and then when I accept those things, down the road he'll tack onto it the things that are proven by faith: Trinity, incarnation, Jesus, resurrection. But you just argued for a deity that cannot incarnate, and now you want me to accept the incarnation. Now, again, to stress this point, when he goes on to flesh out in the chapter on Thomism, what is the Thomistic proof? Well, this God is identical to his essence. He, now we brought in personhood, is identical to his essence. All of his actions are identical. So he literally brings in the modal collapse stuff, right? And he says, we know all this from empirical sense data on pages 122 and 23. I'm not joking. We're not looking at the Bible. So number one, I'm not sure how we've gotten to he, that it's a personal God. That's never treated on. That's never touched on. It's just assumed. He just is his existence. He is his essence. He, person, is nature. Okay, that's the number one error that the Cappadocians point out in Eunomius. So we're literally saying that Eunomian argumentation will get us far enough. Just accept Eunomius's presentation, and when you get the idea of a generic unity from empirical sense data, by the way, and how do we know that the empirical sense data principles are true? Well, because everybody accepts them as true. On page 74, that's what Fazer says. They're completely general.
Well, we seriously got to start making some T-shirts about.
Okay, hold on. It gets better.
Okay.
Then he goes on to say that listen to this. This is what really hammers this home. Who, according to Dr. Fazer on page 190, is he arguing for? For reasons like all of these proofs that he's given, the mainstream of the Western tradition, in terms of philosophical theology. Okay, there is no unified, quote, Western tradition. There is no coherent idea of philosophical theology, I'm arguing. Whether it is the pagans, like Aristotle and Plotinus, or Jews like Maimonides, or Muslims like Avicenna and Averroes, or Christians like Athanasius, Augustine, Anselm, and Aquinas, we have always insisted on divine simplicity as a non-negotiable element of the sound conception of God. So all of these people have a sound conception of God. We go to all of these people like in some sort of like Mount Olympus, like a confederation of the world religions. Please, Maimonides, Aristotle, Plotinus, Avicenna, would you please tell me what is the sound conception of God's unity and simplicity? The Catholic Church has insisted on all of this as its key component of basic orthodoxy. The Fourth Lateran Council's doctrine Notice Phaser reads the Fourth Lateran Council's acceptance of Peter Lombard's doctrine of simplicity exactly the way I've said it this whole time. The First Vatican Council as well, it also affirms the Protestant thinkers like Luther and Calvin's doctrine of simplicity. This doctrine of divine simplicity is just simply what we call classical theism. So what he's argued for in this book is this very same thing that's being refuted in this paper. There is no such thing as classical theism because the rigid designator does not pick out the same God amongst these mutually exclusive systems. It's not a rigid designator. Theism, God, does not tell you. It has no a priori prima facie content. The system, the theological system as a whole, is what provides content to the words God, theism. That's what he's going to argue here in a moment. But I just want to hammer this home that it's not just some academic. This is literally directly, it's literally refuting exactly what's in Phaser's famous book. And I would add to point out that it's not just Roman Catholics. Let me give you an example. I have here the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology, this gigantic monstrosity I just got from William Lane Craig and J.P. Moreland, and it starts out in the opening chapter. What is the project of natural theology? Natural theology is the practice of philosophical reflection on the existence and nature of God, of a real or apparent, independent of divine revelation in Scripture. So we're going to approach questions about God's nature. Think how absurd this is for the Orthodox, given the essence-centered distinction in apophatic theology. How are you going to approach nature and start determining things about the divine essence? This is absurd. I mean, Paul, there's no similarity, according to both Thomism, many of these systems, between God's essence, right? Hence the via negativa. And then they turn around and say, oh, but there actually is a comparison because all creatures are patterned on reflections of the divine essence. So there's no similarity between creatures and the divine essence. When you start listing what are the properties of the divine essence and what are the properties of creatures, they're opposites, right? God is a perfect unity that is the opposite of the composition and particularity of creatures. God is a perfect eternal stasis that is the opposite of the motion, change, and flux of the created order. God is a perfect unity that is the opposite of the multiplicity of creation. So it's always cast out in opposites, right? That's dialectical philosophy. That's what this philosophy is hinging on, is these dialectics. But if God is opposite the world, if he is opposite these lists of attributes here for the created realm as opposed to him, then there's no analogia. Now the cause is nothing like its effect, but all the Thomistic predication, natural theology predication, is predicated on analogia, analogies. But the thing in category 1 is totally dissimilar to the thing in category 2.
Jay, keep going. I'm just going to grab
So it would actually be more consistent to adopt the Islamic perspective, right? As opposed to the natural theology perspective. Let's give another example of this. The designator is not working here. That the name God is flaccid. It's a non-rigid designator. And we can see this in Scripture. What does the word God refer to in Scripture? Well, sometimes it's referring to demons, right? The gods of the nations are devils. Sometimes it's referring to the idols, right? Paul speaks of this in the letters to the Corinthians. Sometimes it's referring to God, Jehovah, or picking out persons of the Trinity. God can pick out the person of the Father, the person of the Son. God can pick out the divine nature. God can pick out the divine actions or attributes. And gods can also be referring to the good angels, right? The council of the gods, right? The divine council, Elohim. So the word God clearly is not picking out, right? It's not a proper noun. But so much of classical theism, generic theism, is predicated on assuming that God is picking out a proper name, namely God the Father, I guess. But guess what? And I was thinking about this because I'm sure people are going to object and say something like, well, look, I mean, don't you at least think that Muslims are at least intending to refer to or pick out God the Father when they say God? No, guess what? They don't believe in God as Father. So that actually doesn't work. Muslims are not picking out God as Father because God is not a Father. And for Christians, if you read Athanasius and the Cappadocians, don't they constantly point out that the eternal Father presupposes a Son? If he's eternally Father, then he's eternally Father of a Son. Okay, well, that's not Muslim. That's a immediate no-no for a Muslim, but that's the immediate step one for an Orthodox Christian. There's no approaching God apart from Father, right? Do you see the point here?
Excellent.
So again, just to stress, to recapitulate what I'm saying is that natural theology is defined as an autonomous philosophical reflection with no direct appeal to revelation, no interest in going to revelation, because that's, in other words, it's presupposing neutrality from the outset. But that's what's in question, right? How do we actually, the fact that you think there's neutrality doesn't mean that there is neutrality. It doesn't mean that things are systemically, that they're not theory-laden.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Let me share a screen, and we'll go back to the nuts and bolts of the logical argument here.
Okay.
So remember 6TC2, the corollary of the theistic position, is they want to assume that all the monotheistic religion believe in the same God. Okay, he's going to show what is the problem really in essence with that. Is that, well, guess what we just showed with the theistic paradox? It can't be established. You need that whole list in order to establish 6TC2. But if these are mutually exclusive, you can't establish it.
Yeah, but can I bring in a point here?
Yes, please.
That one of the things that was in the list, so, for example, that he is free, 7b4, and that he is creator and sustainer, and 7c.
I'll pop it back up so everybody can see.
So 7b4, free, 7b6, and 7c. Wait a minute. For God to be person, do we know? Are we aware of the intense debates in the patristic period? Well, I know it's not technically the patristic period. It's always the patristic period for the Orthodox, but you know what I'm saying, in the first several centuries. So again, if we took something like, when we say God is person, there's no, it can't be divorced from the theological argumentation that went on in that period. So, for example,
and he kind of brings that up, doesn't he? He's
yeah,
like, leave that alone for now, but that's a big one. 7c, God is a person. What?
So you don't know God as personal apart from Father, Son, and Spirit. That's the only ways that God is person. Yes. So what person is Swinburne imagine that he's picking out here? Mm-hmm. Because there's no such thing as generic person. It's got to be the Father, Son, or Spirit. And you see that in the debates with the Cappadocians that they have with Eunomius, right? So there's a whole book, for example, that I'm almost done with, Lucian Terescu's book, Gregory of Nyssa, and the concept of hypostasis, divine personhood. Okay, I just mentioned the Radagowitz book, the Cappadocians, and the
$700.
The Cappadocians. Well, it's Basil, Caesarea, Gregory of Nyssa, and the Transformation of Divine Simplicity. And the book ends by pointing out that that the Orthodox Church accepts the Cappadocian teaching and not the Augustinian teaching of divine simplicity. They have different views. The West accepted the Augustinian. The Augustinian Western doctrine of divine simplicity, as explicated by later theologians like Peter Lombard, accepted at the Fourth Lateran Council, is what conditions the Roman Catholic doctrine both of natural theology and of divine simplicity. And it's not acceptable to the Orthodox. And that those views are contingent on the unique Orthodox doctrine of the person of the Father being the starting point of our Ordo Theologiae. So in other words, if our Ordo Theologiae begins with the person of the Father, you can't have a Thomistic Ordo Theologiae because it doesn't begin its reasoning with the person of the Father. Thomas does a whole book of reasoning without mentioning any of the persons. It's called the Summa Contra Gentiles, Volume 1. The whole book has nothing to do with the Trinity. It's what are all the things that I can know about the unity, the simplicity, the causal role of God, the perfections of God apart from revelation, apart from God as person. So this whole project is a flaw from the outset.
Okay, excellent points. Let us return back for more devastating critiques. And again, this is my notes. This isn't actually the article. It's notes that I made on this to make it a bit easier for you all. So again, because of the theistic paradox, the theist cannot establish that the monotheistic religions believe in the same God.
I gotta plug this in.
He's going to go on and say, and it can be effectively disproved. So not only is he saying your argument's bad, you can't get to this, we're going to go through a series of arguments right now that actually disprove their central claim. The first, he says, because it leads to paradoxical conclusions. The first, because the inference, which purports to establish 6TC2, the monotheistic religions believe in the same God, cannot be but fallacious or circular. And second, because the logical character of belief sentences. That'll be the second argument. In order to show that their premise, or what they want to conclude, monotheistic religions believe in the same God, cannot be established, let's first, he says, try to construct an argument justifying it. So we're steel manning, okay? We're making the argument for them and then actually going to show that there's a logical fallacy involved in that, and thereby it's fallacious and can be disproven. Okay, here's the first approach. He calls it 8CCF. From the fact that Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and other various ramifications believe that there is one God and only one God, being monotheist, it follows that they believe in the same one God. That is their argument, right, Jay? Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes. I mean, it sounds exactly like what Phaser said. Yeah. Exactly.
So what we're going to do is we're going to take an obvious example. We're going to substitute. We're going to keep the form of that argument. And then we're going to substitute in terms to actually see that we're making something called a quantifier shift fallacy. So notice this is the exact same argument. Every girl is in love with one boy. Therefore, there is one boy every girl is in love with. The theistic argument is, hey, Judaism believes in one and only one God. Christianity believes in one and only one God. Islam believes in one and only one God. Therefore, there is one and only one God. Conclusion, therefore, Judaism, Christianity, Islam believe in the same God. That is the quantifier shift fallacy. That's equivalent to say that because every baby has one mother, that therefore every baby has only one mother.
Yeah.
Fallacy. And so it doesn't. And then here's his counterexample. Ahmed believes that there's one and only one. So he's taking additional counterexamples. This one's from mathematics. Ahmed believes that there's only one and only one solution to the mathematics problem. Isaac believes that there's only one. Notice that there's like an Islamic name, a Jewish name, and a Christian name. He actually put in here like 3 names of the 3 religions, which is kind of
right.
cute. Isaac believes that there's one and only one solution to the problem. John believes there's one and only one solution to the mathematics problem. There is only one and only one solution to the problem. Does it follow that Ahmed, Isaac, and John believe in the same solution to the problem?
Yeah, how do people not see that this is obviously a fallacy? And this is just so clear. I mean, we've been making these arguments for so many years, but he has put it into a formal way that is just like, I mean, come on, dude. This is obvious, right?
Yeah. Okay. So all of those are arguments to show, going back to what we said, that they cannot establish their claim that monotheistic religions believe in the same God. Now let's actually disprove it. And this is where we're going to get into the semantical issues. That basically, because of the logical character of belief statements in rigid versus proper names, rigid designators versus non-rigid or flaccid designators, there's a fundamental error that's going to occur, and we can show this. If God is the theist there's a common core, and therefore the common core designates by the name God a proper name, meaning that applies in every possible world, then there's an identity. There's a logical identity between God. All the other stuff is just like superfluous, accidental stuff. If that's true, then we can substitute that term. If it's a proper name as the theist wants, if it's a rigid designator, then because it's a logical identity, then I could substitute this. But let's see how this actually can't work. Let's assume the theist is correct and God is a proper name, and i.e. a rigid designator, meaning that 6TC2 is true. The monotheistic religions believe in the same God. Then notice this: true premise, false conclusion. So it's a good argument, but obviously we made a mistake because it's not in the structure of the argument. Aristotle believed in God. True. God is Trinity. True. Therefore, Aristotle believed in the Trinity.
Oh, there you go.
There's nothing wrong with the structure of this argument. And a valid deductive argument says that if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true. But the conclusion's false. So what went wrong? What went wrong is actually that you cannot have the substitutability of these terms, because guess what? They mean something different. They're not rigid designators. They mean something different in the religion or paradigm or philosophy of Aristotle versus the Christian paradigm. And therefore, they're not rigid designators. And if they're not rigid designators, therefore, the monotheistic religions do not believe in the same God. This is also by Euclides, known as the hooded man paradox. Same thing. It's going to illustrate in which logical and semantic belief sentences actually make a difference when it comes to identity and substitutability. Premise 1, John does not know the hooded man coming. Premise 2, the hooded man coming is John's father. So we could assume those are both true, and you'd have to get to a conclusion that if you think that these names always, let's put it another way, if you ignore the logical content and about belief sentences, then you'd have to conclude that John does not know and does know his Father. So what this demonstrates, both cases, the Aristotle believing in the Trinity and Eubilides' hooded man paradox, is what we call, take note of this, the non-substitutivity of identicals in epistemic, right? This is the knowing, epistemic, or intentional context. Intentional. That within the paradigm, there's an intention that hits a certain God that's very different than in Christianity. And if you ignore that, then you're going to be led to false conclusions from good arguments. So nothing wrong with the argument. So where's the problem? The problem must be I'm not paying attention to this principle here about how semantic and epistemic context will actually determine whether something's a rigid or flaccid designator. Sound good so far?
Yeah, can I interject?
Yes.
So a couple points here is that, again, remember that, and he even uses a little bit earlier Aristotle as an example. Aristotle's God is not the equivalent of Christian theism. So Aristotle's God is thought thinking itself. He is not personal. He has an eternal, other than himself, the created world that he eternally actualizes and moves. That's not our God. There's no eternal complement dyad to God. St. Basil goes after this whole conception of theism in Hexameron 2 and calls it stupid and foolishness, right? And he says it's a dyad. Well, our God's not a dyad, so I don't know where this idea that there's just that because there's a few things that match up, therefore the same referent is easy to refute, as we're actually going to see here in a little bit. But notice that how arbitrary, for example, the list of classical theists were for Phaser, right? Phaser had these lists of people, but wait a minute. Do the deists count? What about the pantheists? What about Satanists? What about a Satanist who thinks that Satan is the one true God? Do you see how arbitrary and absurd it is? So in other words, that shows that there's not a generic theism that we can know just on the basis of the word God, theism, etc. Because Aristotle's God is not our God at a very fundamental level. Deists are not in the same camp as us just because they profess theism, any more than deists are identical to pantheists because they both are, quote, theists. So it becomes evident that the mutual exclusivity of these systems shows that they can't find neutral ground upon which they can be have a common core, so to speak. And he actually uses the term common core. So this gives us, again, proves the premise, the principle that God or theism are theory-laden terms. Later on in this paper, he will go into the conceptual content behind the terms. Well, the word God, and the word theism are going to be systemically determined. They're going to be theory-laden. The systems will tell you what those terms mean, and there's no non-systemic, non-theory-laden content or value to those words. But notice that classical theism's classical foundationalism, the idea that there are neutral, theory-neutral, non-theory-laden content, self-evident content, right? Words, phrases, terms, principles, right? That's presupposed in this system. But that's the very thing that's in question.
Yeah. So that's what all those examples were supposed to show is.
Right.
And what's the problem that we've always critiqued with natural theology? It's just kind of evidentialism, right?
Yes.
We just start from this stuff and that things aren't actually theory contaminating paradigm relative. What he was able to do, the author of this article, is just show that, take that line of reasoning and you're actually going to ignore the idea that belief paradigms and are contaminated, and that belief contents and epistemic identifications are going to be determined by what one knows or believes in terms of the whole, such that you cannot do an interchangeability of those simply based on the word. Okay, it's a fancy logical way of saying what we've always said, Jay. The word concept fallacy. It's just taking it at a deeper level.
It's equivocation. Yeah.
That and he derives this principle in epistemic or intentional context. Okay, what intentional doesn't mean I have a desire, but that my beliefs are directed about, right, the sense and meaning has a referent. Okay, that's within a context, and it's determined. So in epistemic or intentional context, identicals cannot be replaced salva veritate. You have to take in account of the rules of the paradigm that determines the sense and reference.
Yeah. So
therefore, go.
You had a few examples of how that quantifier shift fallacy could be explicated. We heard the one about the girls, the loving of one boy, and you said that every effect has a cause, therefore all effects have the same cause. So we reason from the fact that each effect has a cause to the invalid conclusion that
there's only one cause.
Then there's only one cause for every baby has one mother, therefore every baby has the one and same mother.
In my PhD, I told you my PhD advisor, James O'Shea, who I'll plug his book right there, who's a Kantian scholar and wrote this book on Wilfrid Sellars. He gave me that argument all the way back in grad school, and I didn't really understand it because I was too caught up in natural theology and Thomism and Aristotelian arguments to understand that what he was saying. And here, all along, he was right. It's the quantifier shift fallacy that he was critiquing Aquinas' arguments and these cosmological arguments. He's like, that doesn't follow.
Yeah, exactly. And the same argument, even though we're not right at this point talking about the causation and cosmological argument, the same fallacy is being identified in the claim that all three religions believe in monotheism, therefore they believe in the same God. That's a fallacy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. Where should we go?
Let me give my example. Remember my example?
Yeah, Jay had a great example.
So I was thinking of a way to sort of illustrate that even if a person thinks that, we both have the same end goal, right? We're both intending the same referent. We're both, even if we're picking out the same thing, it still isn't going to work because, for example, imagine I said that I believe that there's buried treasure in the promised land. And I find another friend, oh yes, I believe that there's buried treasure in the promised land too. And so we both have the same belief. And we both have read, about how to go find treasure. We both have ideas. And I say to my friend, how are you going to go about getting the treasure buried in the promised land? And he says, well, let me tell you, I'm going to book a flight right now. I'm going to go over there. When I get to Israel, I'm going to, buy a plot of land where I think it is. And we've got a team and we're going to excavate. And I said, whoa. No. I'm going to Promised Land, which is a Christian bookstore down the road from me. And I know the owner's granddad, and he buried his, stolen bank money underneath the basement in a vault. So we both had the same belief. We both had the same words, totally different referent and totally different ways of what was in our head, right, about getting to the end result there. So the fact that we have similar even phrases and particular names, right, Promised Land in this case was at least intended to pick out a specific referent. It was intended to be even a rigid designator. When we actually look at this example, we see that it was two totally different intentions and two totally different mutually exclusive, right, end results, goals, things that we were trying to do, even though on the surface they appear to be, we're both going to go get the buried treasure in the promised land. So
point being, you can even have a common, quote unquote, list of properties. it's a place where there's a lot of rich history about Christianity. It's
religious people hang out there. They go to
hang out there.
Yeah, they make big journeys to get there. Right.
They even take charitable donations. Right. But it ends up you're not hitting the referent.
Yeah, it's like the word cat. Okay, I mean, what is cat picking out? Cat is not necessarily picking out that cat, right? When it's that cat, right? Spot. I know Spot's a dog name, but so in other words, the word God is no different than the word cat, right? In the sense that it's just picking out one of a class of different things. That when you stepped away, we were looking at the biblical examples of God, and the word, refers to demons, it refers to idols, it refers to angels, it refers to Yahweh. Right? And even humans are called God. Will make you a god to Pharaoh. So the word, again, is, as you said, non-rigid, flaccid designator. And so how do we know what it's picking out then? That's precisely where the system is what gives the content, the conceptual content, to the word God. What we are picking out. Oh, I am picking out as an Orthodox Christian what's in the creed. And the professor in the paper will even say, when Christians say the word God, they mean the Nicene Creed, Trinity. When Muslims say the word God, they mean the Shahada, right? That Allah is the perfect, soul, unity, whatever.
Yeah, that was an excellent point too. Okay, should we go on?
Yeah, I thought I know we're past this, but so he actually kind of elucidated the fact that natural theology's attempt to disprove or to dispense with revelation is precisely what brings about the failure.
Yeah. That's exactly what it was.
Thus, generic
that was my point about the Hicks stuff.
Right. And let's see, what I thought was the disastrous example, devastating example was the one, we already passed that, the Ahmed, the three different people. You've done that part. That it's systemic dependent. We've done that. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to catch up to, because I had notes on each page in the margins. So going back, there was another example he gave. Natural theology, generic theism, is like saying religion is true, right? It's really a meaningless phrase, because when the Muslim says religion is true, when you ask him what he means, right, it's not Christianity. He doesn't think that the Christian is practicing true religion. Right? Are you listening?
Yep. I think, yeah, exactly. He's spot on with the... Okay.
And that's why he got to the non-substitutivity of identicals, right? That principle, really disproves any of these attempts. So I wrote that the crux here was what is at the bottom of page 12. Could you pull? Are you there? Is that where you are?
I am on. Okay, I was on 13. I'll just go up. Okay, bottom of page 12. Yep, I'm there. Because that's the point I left off on. Is the 14 NSI.
Yeah.
So in epistemic or intentional context, identicals cannot be replaced. Salva veritate.
Now we can establish a conclusion that any epistemic argument is fundamentally flawed, which assumes the interchangeability of the belief contents without explicit epistemic identifications. The theist argument cannot be constructed, therefore, with the help of unspecified belief sentences supplemented with non-epistemic premise, since such an argument would violate the principle of the non-substitutivity of identicals.
In other words, exactly what we said. You cannot take an evidentialist approach and therefore from there do natural theology and think that you can prove God or that God means the same thing, or we worship the same God in various religions.
Yes. And then
it's all paradigm relative as far as determining its semantical content, whether it's rigidly designating something, an entity or not, that could be substituted, can't be substituted. Therefore, their argument fails. So this is the first argument he gave, is they can't establish the theist corollary that we all believe. That was the first one he gave.
Exactly.
The second one was it's refuted. This is the argument, refutes it. Like, it's destroyed now, completely.
Yeah, Averroes believes in God. Averroes believes that God, Averroes believes in God, therefore Averroes believes in the Trinity.
Yeah, because God is the Trinity, then you could substitute in, but you can't. We know that. Therefore, their argument is false. So they have no arguments for, and the argument that would prove it was just destroyed by the principle of
non-substitutivity of identicals.
Non-substitutive identicals in epistemic and potential context. Okay. Let's go on. And he goes on to talk about core doctrine and the additions.
Yeah. So Islam Shahada versus the Nicene Creed.
Share. Let's see, that is on page 15. Now, so let me just summarize what we just did. Three faiths share a number of similar doctrines, because this is going to be your transitional thought into the next section. Three faiths share a number of similar doctrines. Indeed, for example, that God created the universe, that there is providence, and that there is a last judgment in some form. This does not justify, however, the assumption of a core doctrine of three religions. Generally speaking, sharing certain properties does not imply that these shared properties are core properties. That certain things happen to fly does not necessarily imply that flying is their core property. One flying thing might be a bird, another an airplane, while a third a bat or a plastic bag blown by the wind. Great argument. Okay, so let's look at conjuncts and truth values. And because now that we see that a paradigm or religion, what the meaning, the semantics of the term God is defined by the rules of all the properties of that religion. They lay that out such that it gives a unique. So now that we know it's not interchangeable, let's look at what he's actually saying about conjuncts and truth values. Now, for example, what he means by conjunct, I could say, I'm trying to think of a logic example. To say that A and B, those are going to have two separate truth values. It could be true, false. However, to say A and B, brackets, has one truth value. In other words, that's what we're going to get to here is, are they just separate interchangeable properties, additions that you can add on, or are they taken together as a conjunct? Because that's going to make a difference. And the fact that you add other things on there is going to actually change the truth values as well. I'll just say this real quick because this was kind of a summary. The meaning of the term God cannot be established independently from a religion, i.e. a paradigm, that is independently of the context of the rules and instructions in which it is used. In fact, God is defined by a particular body of textual, liturgical...
Yeah, the paradigm, exactly, right.
Yeah, in legal and aesthetical use. Isn't this everything we said? Bestowed by a tradition and not the other way around. What's the other way around? Ground up evidentialism.
Yeah, so God and
The
theism are theory-laden terms, and the conceptual content for those comes from the system as a whole. So there's no, again, non-theory-laden idea of what God is. The content of the terms is defined by the systems. God has no conceptual content out of that context. And to see this, all you need to do is realize that Allah is not Father and Son. So that's something exclusionary to who God is in the Islamic system, but it's fundamental to who God is in the Christian system. Hence why we believe in the Nicene Creed. I mean, it's really obvious when you think about this, right? And the systems are mutually exclusive, right? That's really the whole point of page 14, which is really a crucial crux page, right?
Yeah. Okay.
By the way, want to go ahead and take the super chats and call it. I mean, we're kind of past halfway, so.
Yeah, that's fine. I apologize. I lost
it's okay.
Time.
I mean, we've been going for over 2 hours, but we don't want to.
You guys feel educated?
I think we've thinned the herd down to only the most interested people here.
I don't know,
which is good actually. We got rid of we had to ban like 20 just idiots tonight already. So, yep. Okay. So let's get to the super chats here, and I'll have to add, by the way, I know that there's actually a lot of flaccid designated people in this audience, and chalk.com would be a huge advantage for those that. Married people who are having issues with low T. Chalk.com actually has been proven right to boost T. You know what I mean by the T. So we're actually fighting right the soyification. We're actually promoting. We literally want to make you toxic masculine. We want to make you
that will be determined by the context of your supplements.
We want to make you into the toxic masculine. So if you're looking for like ways to be clear-minded, ways to like optimize your health, this is the kind of thing that you want. So again, you guys know I take 7 Wonders, I take I take the Tomcat, which is full of the Long Jack, if you know what I mean. I take Chalk daily. So all 3 of these, actually, you get a good deal if you use the promo code J that I put into the chat there for you guys. And hey, they're like super base dudes that just got zucked, right? So they had a huge platform. They got removed from Instagram, and you know they've been longtime supporters of Jay's analysis. Now they're like literally one of our official. We're branded, you guys. We're branded. This is like legit e-celeb status here. So if you guys want,
next level. Yeah.
Exactly. So go over and support those guys. You can actually order like the recurring subscription service stuff too. So if you want the supplements to come on a regular basis, then use the promo code J. I think it's J80 is the new code right now, where you get like 80% off if you want to do the recurring. I'm actually gonna step out of the box in the next couple of days and check out some of the other supplements, because I actually have everything. I have all of their stuff, but because I haven't really experimented with the She Legit yet, so I want to check that out. But these other supplements are legit. They're for real. Like, I've really noticed a lot more energy. I've noticed a lot more virility, which I wasn't even lacking. So it's like to the extreme. So anyway, shout out to chalk.com, and definitely step over there if you guys would, and get your supplements. And if you're watching this later, I'll have the promo codes in the show description as well down below. So Father D, can go ahead with what you were going to say.
Let's take super chats.
All right, Mikhail, the King of Kings, for $5. Thank you. God bless you, Father Deacon and Jay Dyer. Well, thank you. Much appreciated. The Palantir sends $5, and he says, "Hey guys, I have a question. If the Orthodox conception of hell is not so much a place one is sent to, but rather the inner state of the soul to the reality of God, how are we then to make sense of Christ's descent into Hades?" So it is a place that we are sent to, but Hades is destroyed in the descent of Christ into Hades. So Hades is not where people are going. Hades is a place that's transformed. And what happens in the eschaton is that it's the presence of God that is what is the torment to the wicked. So Hades is transformed, but that doesn't mean that there's no place, because the wicked are resurrected, so they still have they're still in a place, but that place, wherever that is not away from the presence of God. It's actually the presence of God that is ever ill-being to them.
And I think that also, like, in the sacred space of the church building within the context of liturgy too, the physical locale and location and space has a real spiritual and theological significance. So I don't see them mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
We talk about the New Jerusalem. I've been to Jerusalem, and that there's the gates, right? The gates of of Jerusalem, in which the faithful are protected. And then there's the outside, and right outside the gates is Gehenna, the trash heap, which is like a valley. And I think that that'll continue, that a literal actually place will continue in the next life and after the final judgment, that the gates of New Jerusalem will be open and God's presence will be everywhere. But there will be people that are out and within, but all experiencing. So I don't think there's this dialectics that it's like, oh, it's just a state. I still think there's an importance.
Yeah, well, the wicked are resurrected in bodies, so yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right, Palantir says...
I don't know if it'll look exactly like how it is in Jerusalem, but I imagine that same physical kind of description will be in the eschaton too, that there will be the gates of the New Jerusalem and those outside of it. And the gates are opened, as it describes in Revelation, meaning they could come in, but given their own state, they can't. They don't want to, because of how they solidified themselves.
Yeah. Well, that gets into his next question, which he says, Palantir says, since everybody has a body in the world to come, how come the damned are unable to repent in the eschaton? Well, repentance requires grace, and the damned do not get grace in the eschaton. So their nature is restored, but they're not participating in divine life. So the fact that they have a body and the fact that they still possess, in some sense, a will does not mean that they will be able to will and choose the good. It's similar to the way that the wicked angels, they possess a will, but they're not able to will the good anymore because they confirm themselves in the perpetual choice of evil. So the wicked will not be able to choose the good. They will just consistently be willing evil. I've heard the argument that the wicked cannot act out of their repentance, but why is that the case if they have new bodies? Well, repentance is not conditioned just on having a body. So it requires not just a will, but also grace. And the wicked don't get grace. Palantir says again for $5. The final question from me today. I know that one's soul and hypostasis are different things, right? So persons have souls. They're not identical to souls. I am struggling to distinguish them. Well, so body and soul are faculties of human nature. They're properties, right? Body, soul, mind, will, those are things that make up what it is to be human. But they're not instantiated without some person having them. So they are inhypostatized. Those features or traits of nature exist in the mode of the persons that have them. So that's why you can't reduce a person to any nature or trait. Just like in the Trinity, you can't reduce the persons to the nature or trait of the Godhead or the divine attributes, right? The Spirit is not reducible to love. The Son is not reducible to, some attribute, will or property, right? You can't say the Son is the will of the Father, right? You can say it in the sense of manifestation, which Athanasius does. He says the Son is the reason of the Father, but that's is of manifestation, not is of strict identity. So in the same way, if we make traits or features of nature what is the definition of person, that's the heresy of Apollinarianism. Because Apollinaris said that human nature was essentially the mind, reason. And since he wanted to combat Nestorianism, he wanted to remove the possibility of Christ being a human person. So what did he do? He replaced the human. He replaced the human reasoning faculty in Christ with the Logos. So he's a divine person, right? According to Apollinaris, who lacks human reasoning. Why? Because human reasoning is what it is to be a human person. That's not true. We're not Apollinarians. We don't believe that. So the refutation of Apollinarianism is precisely predicated on the distinction between nature and person. So the faculties, the properties, the components of what it is to have human nature, body, mind, soul, will, right, is not, none of those are reducible to the human person, because the human person has those things, you see. Hence, Christ assumes universal human nature, as the fathers teach. Thus, the recapitulation. So you said, what is the distinction between a sinful soul and a sinful person? Right. Well, that's ways to describe things that a person has or does. It's not a description of identity. This is a distinction between the is of predication and the is of identity. The dog is brown, right? That's not the is of identity. That's the is of predication. So the dog is brown. That doesn't mean that the dog is literally the color brown. The dog has brown as an instance. It's that simple. Bantu, $2. Is it possible to construct your own religion with generic theism? And if that's the case, why don't I just start my own cult and make money? Generic theism is built on human reasoning, and that's why it will always fail. God be with you, Jay and Father Deacon. Yes, it is.
That's funny. That's the next argument. Right?
It is precisely
the religion argument.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Orthodoxy Chloroquine, $25. Why did the West ignore the fundamental teaching of the Cappadocian Fathers concerning their rejection of absolute divine simplicity and the affirmation of the essence, energy, person-nature distinction, and then turn around and claim that they actually taught Thomism all along? This is absurd. Well, the West at the time didn't reject the Cappadocians. In fact, the ecumenical councils, especially, you could say that it's implied in Constantinople I accepting the Cappadocians, that implicitly thus they are accepting the essence energy distinction of the Cappadocians. You could say that it's implied in Ephesus, because Ephesus accepts St. Cyril's teachings on the whole, pretty much, and St. Cyril clearly in many, many passages teaches the essence energy distinction explicitly. You could say that Chalcedon implicitly also teaches the essence energy distinction, even though it's not explicit in the acceptance of the previous councils. And you could say that the Fifth Council accepting the Leontii, or particularly St. Leontius of Jerusalem's teaching of inhypostasis, that's an implicit acceptance of the energies as well, because the Sixth Council refers back to the Fifth Council when it teaches two wills and two energies in Christ. So really, if you know the literature, if you know the patristic teaching, then you realize that ecumenical councils 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all pretty much teach the essence energy distinction. And the West accepting those things is kind of default accepting those things too. So what happens, though, is that after many centuries in the West goes in a different direction, eventually accepting more and more Augustinian assumptions and conclusions, such as filioque. Then you have the disputes at the time of St. Photius. Then you have the full break in 1054. And then you get, ultimately, there's not the crystal clear ideas of the two different churches is Council of Lyon and Florence versus the Palamite synods. That's where it's crystal clear that we're both totally different and both reject each other. The Orthodox Palamite synods reject Rome. St. Gregory of Palamas says Rome is apostate. Rome is heretical. Rome is heterodox. He says they listen to Satan. Okay, the Palamite synods accept his teaching, just like Ephesus accepts Cyril's teaching. Okay, so it's the same principle, the same approach. Therefore, we can't say that, well, if we just have a lot of academics get together, they can figure out a way to smush, Florence and St. Gregory of Palamas together. It doesn't work. So they're mutually exclusive, you see. You see how this applies to the theology too? Mutual exclusivity. Anyway, it is absurd. Orthodoxy Chloroquine, $25 again, says, I watched a video on the debate between St. Gregory Palamas and Barlaam. It's beyond comedy how Roman Catholics and its progeny Protestantism are collapsing before our very eyes, and we watch Orthodoxy vindicated as the saints warned us a long time ago. Yeah, exactly. St. Gregory Palamas says to Barlaam, if you accept your divine simplicity, created grace teachings, the West will go into atheism. It's exactly what happened. Exactly. Father, any comments before I move on?
No, go ahead.
Orthodox Prepper, $7. Questions and concepts that often come up from New Agers. Do our thoughts create reality? Does truth come from within? What is your take on New Age spirituality? Thank you, Jay and Father Deacon. I'll let you answer those. First one, how would you reply to a New Ager, Father Deacon, who asked you, do our thoughts create reality, and does truth come from within?
I would turn them to, where's my book? Thoughts Determine Our Lives. Remember that book?
Is that one of the elders?
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I gotta be better organized with my books. Elder Thaddeus.
I knew it. Told you it was one of the elders.
Elder Thaddeus. Oh, here it is. I found it. All the wisdom
is in those two books. Everything you need. Okay, but the way in which Elder Thaddeus says our thoughts determine our lives is not the same way that New Agers.
No,
New Agers believe that your mind is God, and it literally makes the external world.
Exactly. And so no, and part of that is this whole temptation that you are God.
Exactly.
So it's demonic in origin.
Exactly. Does truth come from within? No, it comes from without,
yes.
Which then allows you to see what's truly within, right? The truth that is within you. But you have to be purified. You have to have your mind illuminated. You have to repent before you can return to the inward and see the truth inside you. There's a cleansing process that has to occur. This is why the fathers speak of what's the purification, illumination, and deification. So that's the process of every saint.
Okay, what was the other part of or those were the two questions?
What would be your general take on then New Age spirituality?
Well, I think it's destructive, obviously, and it takes us. There's nothing new about New Age.
Yeah, exactly right.
That they come from these, these other kind of religions about that's either kind of monistic or dualistic, and ultimately are self-destructive, both epistemologically and in terms of one's life.
Exactly. Pano says for $5, chalk will get rid of all your flaccid designators. Exactly. You read my mind. So we're on the same. Me and Pano are on the same wavelength. We're even making the same jokes now. This is crazy. Yeah. Mardi Gras Q, $10. So thank you, Mardi Gras Q, for $10. If you want the second half of this, of course, you can subscribe at Jay's Analysis. And in the next couple days, it won't be tonight, Father Deacon and I will do the part 2, and then I'll get that up for you guys. But everybody always asks immediately after the first half, where's part 2? I don't do it right away. It usually takes a day or two. So I've been behind, as you guys know, on the part 2s for everybody in the website because of the website troubles last week. I think most of that's fixed. It had to do with incompatible plugins after 2 or 3 updates. This happens about once a year on the website, so sorry for that. But hopefully it'll be ironed out pretty soon. The shop is down precisely because of the incompatibility of the plugins. So whenever the people who write the code, when they correctly update their plugins, I have to wait until they do that before I can turn it back on and it will work. Otherwise, the whole site collapses. So everybody be sure to subscribe to Father Deacon. I'm going to add the links to Patristic Faith, which again is the new project if you didn't hear at the beginning. And thank you guys so much for the super chats. I will be sharing those with Father Deacon. And then if you want to hear the second half of this, it's going to be killer. Subscribe to Jay's analysis, and we're not going to lay all of our cards on the table. We can't lay everything out because we do have the big debate coming up in a few weeks on this topic with Trent. So look forward to that. And anything else you want to leave anybody with? I know you've been putting up some really good lectures and talks, Father Deacon.
Yeah, I'm just going to continue to do that. Introduction to philosophy, ethics. I have other ones too, some logic lectures. I've got the political philosophy, and I'll do, Jay's model's been so successful, and yes, I too have to support my family, and so I give a free half and then a second for much, as compared to what the logic lectures I used to charge. These are much more affordable. I'm trying to make it more affordable while at the same time trying to support my family, have my cake and eat it too. So more of those. I've got tons of them recorded. I'm just kind of going through the editing and packaging those so that they're the best kind of quality audio video that you can get for your money. So you can find my materials on Facebook or my Gumroad account, which is in the links to my videos.
Yeah, and I've been watching those. Jamie and I watched your introduction to ethics. That was a really fun class. And then the interview that you did with Lewis the other day on Orthodox epistemology was great. So I want to encourage everybody to go watch those for sure. We got another super chat from Children. We are the children of the soil, open mouths in the air. If you don't know that Children of the Sun song by Dead Can Dance. So I think he's doing a play on Children of the Sun from Dead Can Dance, but he did Children of the Soy. So thank you for that super chat there, Children of the Soy, much appreciated. Everybody go listen to Dead Can Dance, and you'll know what I'm talking about. But I think that's it for tonight, and hopefully I can get you to come back in the next couple days. And then since we did a lot of this essay, let's do the last part of it, and then maybe you and I can do a little bit of chatting for the subscribers.
Yes.
In a couple chapters of this book.
Let's do it.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Father Deacon, and